knew that she was going to be convicted. But what was more important than her case per se, whether or not she was convicted or not, was the fact that between the time she was arrested on Thursday and the time of the trial on Monday, the black community had become so upset and disturbed over the bus situation and over Mrs. Parks' arrest until we had concluded that this simply was it, the straw that broke the camel's back.
You don't know this girl, and that's on purpose. When civil rights activism was growing, as it had since the end of World War II, groups knew they would have to be able to launch a PR campaign. If they could find the right person in the right situation, they could spread their ideals wide and far enough to garner enough sympathy with those in power that they would have to listen. The only problem was, who would they choose? What's important to note is that Alabama was under Jim Crow segregation at the time. This meant under state and local laws, discrimination based on race was legal. This resulted in non-white Americans receiving amenities of a substantially lower quality than their white counterparts. Claudette Colvin was born Claudette Austin on September 5, 1939. Montgomery, Alabama, USA was her state of birth. She was attending Booker T. Washington High School in Alabama, deep into Jim Crow segregation territory. Here she was taught black history, which wasn't taught in nearly as much detail as it would be in white schools. She learned of famous black women like abolitionist Harriet Tubman, abolitionist Sojourner Truth, and opera singer Marian Anderson. In 1952, she was struggling in her classes. This is because her younger sister had died. Claudette had been a Montgomery citizen since she was 8 years old. When school finished on early 2nd of March 1955, Claudette decided to get on a bus opposite Martin Luther King's church with 13 of her friends. At this time in American history, the bus driver had final say in all seating arrangements. As such, when the bus began to fill with white people, he demanded the girls stand so the white people could sit. Sat at the window, Claudette refused to move. The person wanting her seat was a young white woman, hardly the type of elderly person that would require a seat on a bus for a short bus ride. Thanks to social and peer pressure, however, 3 of her friends stood up. Despite the seats now being available to host a white woman, she refused. This would have meant sharing a row with a black student. Believing it was her constitutional right to sit wherever she wanted, because she had paid her fare, Claudette refused to move. The bus continued on in uncomfortable silence until it reached a junction where police cars were stationed. There were 2 officers boarded the bus. Claudette knew her rights. She had been a member of the NAACP Youth Council since 1952. Rosa Parks was her mentor. Needing to drag Claudette away, they forced her into an adult jail cell as punishment for making them manhandle her. Her minister paid the bill, but her family were stuck living in fears of attacks from the white Montgomery population. Ultimately, in May of that year, Claudette was charged with disorderly conduct and violating the city's segregation laws. Claudette's trial received attention in part due to her age, because she was only 15 at the time. Rosa Parks, her mentor and friend of her mother, was particularly horrified by her arrest. Despite the unofficial outcry of support from the black community, it failed to arise in any legal sense. Boycotts, long discussed but feared for their reprisals, were not permitted over PR fears of public support. Famous civil rights lawyer E.D. Nixon felt Claudette would not work within the conservatism of 1950s America, especially when she became pregnant later that year. However, Claudette believed that her rejection was on the basis of class, as her family were not middle class or close to activists in her circles. However, on February 1st, 1956, hotshot civil rights attorney Frank Gray used her case uniquely. Unlike in Park's case, which was a criminal case, he used discrimination prior to a rebellious act to highlight the affront to the Constitution. The NAACP was able to convince the involved women to become plaintiffs in a federal civil action lawsuit, which meant they could bypass the Alabama court system and go straight to the higher up court. Gray used the cases of 4 black women, Arline Browder, Susie McDonald, Mary Louise Smith, and Claudette Colvin in Browser v. Gale. 2 out of the 3 assembled judges ruled that Alabama laws were in violation of the US Constitution's 14th Amendment by segregating buses as they had not provided equal protection. Judges Frank Minnis Johnson and Richard Reeves agreed, but Judge Harris Lynn dissented. Judge Reeves went as far as to say the Equal Protection Clause requires equality of treatment before the law of all persons without regard to race or colour. Gray's argument was similar to the one Thurgood Marshall, a researcher for this case, used when he was part of Brown v. Board of Education. The Supreme Court upheld the decision on November 13, 1956, when the city appealed, so no longer could Montgomery buses be segregated. The impact of this landmark ruling was that the federal public transport could no longer be segregated. The ruling was implemented on December 20th after Gale was handed an official written notice by federal marshals. Claudette Colvin Day was established on March 2nd, 2017 in the city. New York Congressman Joe Crowley issued her congressional certificate in 2018, recognizing her for her public service contributions. Claudette was cleared of all charges on December 16th, 2022 and is still alive today.